Overnight, a Russian airstrike on a military training base in western Ukraine killed at least 35 people and then wounded 134. This is bringing the war closer to the border with Poland and at NATO's doorstep. The training center has been used by Ukraine's military, often with instructors from the U.S. and other NATO countries. The New York Times reporting that American forces were at the base to train the Ukrainian army until February and then withdrew a few days before the Russian invasion. Thousands of soldiers on both sides are believed to have been killed in the fighting so far, along with a lot of civilians and at least 79 Ukrainian kids, according to the government there. At least 2.5 million people have now fled. President Biden has authorized another $200 million in military aid to Ukraine, including both small arms and large weapons. And with all of these huge developments that have been happening over the weekend, to help give us a little bit of context about what's going on, MSU Denver's President Janine Davidson is joining us live. Good morning, Janine. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you for coming on again. We appreciate it. Wanted to just start off with, after this attack on the training center, once again, we were hearing from Ukrainian leaders asking for a no-fly zone. NATO once again saying they're resistant to the idea out of fear of a bigger conflict. Can you explain a little bit about what exactly a no-fly zone is?
Sure. The fact that Vladimir Putin has targeted this particular base is actually telling and sort of feeds into this whole dynamic. We have been actively training and equipping the Ukrainian military for at least 8 years and escalating with that in the last couple of years and definitely since the attack. And he knows it. And that's one of the bases where a lot of that activity has been happening. So what he's trying to do is provoke us, actually. The big argument against a no-fly zone, well, there's two parts to it. There's the military part and the political part. The political part is, if we end up in the skies over Ukraine militarily, a no-fly zone requires air-to-air and air-to-ground, ground-to-air. So what you're going to have is American planes, mostly, because that's where most of the firepower is, actively engaging Russian pilots, flying with Ukrainians. There's a lot of opportunity for mishaps, given the fact that a lot of the Ukrainian planes are very similar to the Russian planes. There's a lot of opportunity for escalation, because one of the things that happens in the air fight is surface to air. So people shooting planes out of the sky from the ground. And those ground places are often on the Russian side. They're in Belarus, they're in Crimea. So now you're going to have to really expand the military fight into those regions, which is escalatory. So that's a problem. But politically, it's even more of a problem. There's not a lot of unity about this with our allies. We have fought really hard to get unity across the international system, and NATO is more unified than ever because of Vladimir Putin, and this would just tear that apart. And then, finally, back to the attack on that base, Vladimir Putin knows that if NATO starts to come in, he has every excuse in the world to escalate. And he's already getting pushback inside Russia. And you could also see that that actually solidifying, just as the attack by Putin solidified our unity with our allies and the unity across Ukraine. An attack, as he would frame it, in Russia would solidify his support, which is very weak right now.
Yeah, I mean, one of his points of contention was NATO drills being done at that training center. One of the things I've been wondering about is like the history of no-fly zones. I mean, has it been used before? How was it enforced?
Sure. The United States of America operated a no-fly zone for a decade over Iraq, in the northern part of Iraq, after the first Iraq war ended in the early 90s. The idea was there was already sort of a peace operation in place, and it was designed to sustain that. A no-fly zone in an active military fight is a totally different thing.
All right. I think that's really good perspective. I've been wondering that for a while. You were talking about this a little bit then. So with the fighting now coming within just maybe 12, 15 miles of the Poland-Ukrainian border, does this change the game for NATO, or do they stick to their position because of all of those other factors that you were talking about, mainly escalating this into an even bigger crisis?
I think they're going to stick. And I think the point being that the fact that Vladimir Putin is targeting that base says to me he is exactly trying to provoke. He's trying to pull NATO into this war so that he can escalate. And, if Vladimir Putin escalates at this point, given the pretty lame situation of his conventional forces, the idea that he could go tactically nuclear is not out of the range. And that's another really serious consideration.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that context and that perspective. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll get a check of the weather.